All right, so like I said, we're continuing this series called The Minor Leagues. And like I said, we're looking at these characters in the Bible that are known as the minor prophets. And the reason they're called the minor prophets wasn't because they were less important. It was just because it's based off the size of the books in the Bible. They were shorter books. You can read all of them pretty quickly in a day. They're not very long. But the shorter books in the Bible, they still had a huge impact on what God was doing then and how it ultimately led to Jesus and how that led to all of our opportunity to be rescued and restored through Christ. And the thing with the minor prophets is they did some crazy things which we're digging through, but they were also some weird people who got themselves into some weird situations because God called them to. And God used these minor prophets for one major purpose, and that major purpose was simply to get people's attention. Oftentimes in life, what we do is we kind of lose track of God. We lose focus of God. And God used these minor prophets just like we lose track now. They lose track back then. He used these minor prophets to kind of get Israel and people around them, get their focus back on who God is and what he was doing. The thing with the minor prophets, they kind of are like minor league baseball. These are still professional baseball players. These are still important players, but they're just not as popular as the top level guys. And the thing with minor league baseball teams is they are really weird. They do whatever they can to get people's attention. And so we had to research this. And so you can't have a baseball-themed series without doing some research on minor league baseball. So a few of us went to a minor league baseball game in West Virginia, to a West Virginia Black Bears game. And let me tell you, it did not disappoint. I mean, it was weird. It was awkward, way different than going to like a Pirate game and things like that. But here's what happened. We get there, and there's very few people there because who's thinking about going to a minor league baseball game on a Wednesday evening? So we get there, we paid very little money to get really good seats, and I'm excited to watch some baseball, but then the weird happened. And what the weird was this time is during this game, to get people's attention, to try to draw people out, they brought in this dude named Tyler. And Tyler's bit was this. It was Tyler's amazing balancing act. Tyler was all about balancing stuff on his face. This is what existed for this game. And so what happened is Tyler did this. He could balance anything on his face. And so in between innings, he'd go on the field and he'd go and balance, big, long, sticks and poles on his face. He balanced a wheelbarrow on his face, which is interesting and awkward. There's Tyler. Yeah, that's Tyler's amazing balancing act. And so Tyler did that. And then what he would do is during the game being played, he would walk through the stands. Now, I'm a guy who loves baseball. I want to watch the game. But Tyler's going through the stands. He's like, hey, everybody, do you have stuff I could balance on my face? And this is what he's asking people in the middle of the game. And so, people are giving him their beard to balance on his face and their sunglasses and their gloves. Our tech guy, Scott, loves this guy. He thinks he's the greatest guy ever. Tyler walked by Scott, and Scott was like, Tyler, you are amazing. He played off the words of his amazing balancing act. And Tyler goes back to Scott, no, you're amazing. And it was one of Scott's greatest moments of his life. He met one of his all-time heroes in that moment. And so Tyler's amazing balancing act is happening. So he balances things that people would give him. And the best part was this guy rolls up in a wheelchair and says, can you balance my wheelchair? And you finally see the look on Tyler's face oh, can I do this? And so finally it gets everybody's attention. The game is being played behind us. We all turn our heads to watch to see if Tyler can balance this wheelchair on his face. And spoiler alert, he could. It's pretty impressive. It's his amazing balancing act. But this is what minor league baseball teams do. They do whatever they can to get people to come, to get their attention. It's weird. It's kind of fun, but it worked. It got people's attention. And the minor prophets can be a lot like that. They play an important role, but they can be full of weird stuff too. And sometimes those weird moments that get people's attention, that can throw us off. And I've been a guy who I've grown up, I grew up in the church, I went to Bible school, so I've studied and got my degree in the Bible and things like that. And in the Bible, there's a lot of weird moments with a lot of weird people and a lot of weird stories. And when you come across those things, a lot of us can go, that's just too far-fetched. That's weird. I don't want anything to do with that. It can cause a lot of us to even question whether this whole thing is true and real when it comes to God, faith in Jesus. And this is why this series is so important, because these minor prophets play a big role in our understanding of God and of our trust in Him. Because all too often we come across stories and we kind of go, I don't know if I want to deal with this. There's stories that seem far-fetched, topics we don't like to deal with, and there's moments and situations that just seem kind of crazy. There were parts in the Bible that Jewish boys actually could not read until they were teenagers because it was so sexually explicit. There's crazy stuff in the Bible that we don't realize sometimes, and these minor prophets are part of it. And all these can cause us to avoid these stories, but I don't think we should avoid them. In fact, I think we should embrace them. I think we should dig into them. I think we should explore them, because even in the weird stories that we're seeing in the minor leagues, we can chalk them up as too unbelievable, which causes us to maybe question if the Bible's believable or not, or we just don't want to deal with them or ignore them. But if we miss it, we miss some extremely important truths about God and from God. And so whether you're a Christ follower or someone who maybe is still exploring who this Jesus guy is, and you wouldn't say, yeah, I'm a Jesus follower or anything like that, you're just trying to figure this stuff out, no matter where you are in this journey, I think it's important for all of us to enter into the weirdness of the Bible sometimes. And this series helps us do that, because the tension I think it raises is, what if the unbelievable moments of the Bible actually help us in our belief? What if these weird, almost crazy stories that seem too crazy to be true actually help us understand more of who God is? And this leads us to exploring the life of Hosea in our minor league series. Hosea is a pretty intense and very weird character and a crazy story that leads to a lot of hope throughout his ministry and journey that we see in the Bible. Because here's what these prophets were. They were people that God called out to share a message meant to get people's attention, which I mentioned, and to speak truth into the culture and to the lives that was taking place right there. And some of this truth could be about a present situation. Some of the truth these prophets would say could be about a future situation down the road. It could be something about God's character or God's will, anything really that speaks into people. This is what these prophets were called to do, and Hosea was one of these prophets. And here's a little bit of a background about Hosea. Sometimes these characters seem almost like a fictional story. There's a lot of history behind who these guys were. So Hosea lived and did his ministry in 8th century BC. And so we can date when he lived and when he did his preaching and teaching and all that kind of stuff. And he did it in a specific region. He did it in northern Israel. Israel split into two different kingdoms. There was the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, because they got mad at each other and went their own separate ways. And so Hosea lives and does his ministry in the northern kingdom during Jeroboam II's reign. And Jeroboam is one of the worst kings in Israel's history. Here's what Jeroboam was all about as a king. He was apathetic towards God. He just didn't really care about him. He knows the Jewish history and Israel's history of God rescuing them and redeeming them and giving them this nation. But Jeroboam was like, I don't care, I'm going to do my own thing. He was about power. He was about control. And in that, he allowed a lot of different things to happen so he could keep his control. He allowed a lot of idol worship to happen in Israel, so the Israelites would go to different temples from different cultures in that area and worship these false gods. People regularly cheated, they stole, they killed other people freely, they raped other people freely. There may have been child sacrifices even going on in this time. And Jeroboam just didn't care, because he was like, I don't care. As long as I keep my power, this is what I'm all about. When there was no leadership because of him, the people just kind of went their own way, their own wayward way. Also, him and his people and his kingdom, they relied too much on political allies, Assyria and Egypt, instead of God. And this led Israel to forget about their intimate relationship with God. This whole journey for Israel was about them having this intimate relationship with God, that God was their people and he was their God, and he was raising them up to do amazing things. And they're like, now we're going to do our own thing. We're going to follow Assyria and Egypt and worship these other gods. And Hosea comes and he prophesies against this to remind them of God's love for his people. And this is his main purpose and his main message. So the book of Hosea in the Bible, in the Old Testament, What we have here is about 25 years of Hosea's work. So when you read the book of Hosea, it doesn't happen like in one day. It's just 25 years of his collected teachings and preachings, and most of it is actually poetry and storytelling. This is how he does his work. He told it through poetry, writing, and storytelling to Israel, but it came with some real life examples. And here's how the book of Hosea is kind of broken up. The first section is actually about his marriage. And why that's important, you're going to see in a moment if you're not familiar with who Hosea is. And then the next section is about the accusations and warnings against Israel for what they're doing and how they're kind of going away from God. And then the end of it leads to this hope. Hosea ends his work and his writings with a lot of hope, saying God is doing something about the problems that you're facing right now. And so that's the background, that's kind of the history of Hosea, but here's the real story of Hosea. The first is this: God tells Hosea to marry a specific purpose, and it was in this that God was going to show Hosea and Israel what his relationship with them was actually like. And here's what we see in Hosea chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So God tells Hosea to go marry Gomer. First of all, let's just pause right there. How sexy of a name is Gomer? Like, seriously, like, single guys in the room, you meet a girl named Gomer, you're like, oh, that name, that gets me right there, man. That's it, Gomer. You know, Mom, I met this girl. What's her name? Gomer. Like, this is it. And so he marries this woman named Gomer. But notice what God calls this woman. He knows about this woman, what her heart's like, and he calls her a promiscuous woman, that she is not going to be faithful to Gomer. So he tells Hosea to marry this woman named Gomer and say, you're going to marry her, you're going to have children with her, but she is not going to be faithful to you. Like, imagine Hosea's reaction, like, what? Like, why would I do this? This seems horrible for me, but this is what God tells Hosea to do. He's going to use Hosea to get Israel's attention to how they're living, and this is how he's going to do it, by having an unfaithful wife. You see, God will send Hosea through what he is experiencing himself so that Hosea can prophesy from that knowledge and experience. Is this messed up and weird? Yes, like this is what I mean. We get to moments like this in the Bible, we're like, what is this? This is goofy, this is weird. Why? But it's getting people's attention. And so Hosea is faithful to God, because you kind of wonder, why would he say yes? But he's faithful to what God is calling him to do. So he marries Gomer. And he has 3 children with her. And in that time, after that time, whatever it is, she ends up leaving him and going with another man. And so Hosea is left with a broken marriage, a broken life, a broken household with 3 kids, and now his wife ran out on him to go with another guy. And then he starts using this to explain to Israel, hey, Israel, this is what you're like. God tells Hosea to say to Israel that they are unfaithful and they cheat on God. And he warns Israel of this because of their unfaithfulness, there will be consequences. Hosea writes in Hosea 2:4, I will not show my love to her children because they are the children of adultery. And this is God speaking through Hosea here. He's saying, listen, because of your cheating, because of your unfaithfulness to Israel, I'm not going to show you my love to who you are because of what you've done. So he's warning them, this is who you are, Israel. You run from God, you run out on your first love, you run out on this marriage covenant with God, and you do your own thing, and there's consequences to that. But God is not giving up. Remember, Hosea is weird and crazy, but it has a lot of hope in it. This is what Hosea writes in 2 verses 19 and 20. He says, but I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. And so Hosea starts his life with this crazy marriage to Gomer. And then he starts his prophecy to Israel by saying, listen, you cheat on God, you run away from God, you do your own thing, and God's not going to show you his love anymore, but he's not giving up on you. Yes, he's angry. Yes, he's hurt. Yes, he's frustrated, but he's not giving up on you. He's going to betroth you to him forever. He's not stopping his pursuit of you. See, God is hurt. He's angry at Israel's rebellion, but his love conquers all. And in that pursuit of them, he's showing them that by saying, I'm not giving up on you. He's going after Israel to bring them back to him. And he calls Hosea to do the exact same thing with Gomer. Chapter 3, verse 1, this is what God says to Hosea. The Lord said to me, Hosea writing this, go show your love to your wife again. Though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love their sacred raisin cakes. And so God tells Hosea to go and get his wife back. Go get Gomer, go show her his love, go and get her, even though she has another man, because God loves Israel the same way. Even though they turn to other gods and run away from God, God loves them so much he's going after them. And so he says, even though Israel turns to other gods and they love their sacred raisin cakes, and again, like if you just read that, you're like, raisin cakes, what? Is this like a snack they just love so much stuff on? Here's the job of a pastor sometimes. When you read that and you're about to teach on it, you go, what in the world is the deal with raisin cakes? And here's why God said that to Hosea. Raisin cakes were a delicacy in that culture that was often used in temple worship. They would take these raisin cakes that were this delicacy and they would offer it to these false gods as a way to kind of gain favor from these false gods, whether it was in fertility or wealth or land or whatever it was. This was their offering to these false gods. And so they ran away from God, did their own thing by getting these raisin cakes, taking to these other temples of other cultures and saying, okay, this God and this God and this God, I'm going to give all these raisin cakes to as an offering so I get blessed in my life. And so God's like, they run to other gods, they love their raisin cakes, and now you know. Like, if you don't know, now you know. Here's the truth about raisin cakes in the Bible. And so they do this stuff, and God tells Hosea, this is what Israel is like, this is what Gomer is like, go get Gomer. Go get your girl, Hosea. And so Hosea does just that. In verses 2 and 3, Hosea writes, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer of a lethek of barley. Then I told her, you are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way towards you. So Hosea goes after Gomer, and he has to pay for her. Which is kind of weird, right? Like, this is his wife. Why would he have to give money and food to get his wife back? But in that culture, women were treated like property. Essentially, when Gomer ran away from Hosea and went with this other man, she became this other man's property, essentially. And so Hosea can't just go and say, you're mine now, come back with me. He has to pay off the debts that Gomer has brought upon herself by being with this other man. And they struck a deal, whatever, for 15 shekels and some barley, and that was enough for this guy to give Gomer back to her husband. So he pays off this ransom, this payment, this debt that she owes. He redeems her and pays the cost for her. Then he tells her that she is to commit to him and he will commit to her. And this is what God is calling of Israel too. So he uses Hosea's marriage to Gomer as this illustration of, this is what you do, Israel, but this is my love for you. I'm not giving up for you. I'm chasing after you. This becomes the basis of Hosea's work and his prophecy. That his marriage to Gomer is this prophetic symbol to God's relationship with Israel. Despite their unfaithfulness, despite them chasing after other idols and other loves, that God is relentless in their pursuit of them. And so that starts the book of Hosea. The rest of Hosea is mainly a collection of his preaching through poetic writing of accusations against Israel. And there's 14 chapters in Hosea. We're not going to cover all those today, but I'm going to give you the highlights, essentially, of what Hosea writes about the accusations of Israel. And the first accusation was this. He tells them, listen, this is what you're like. You run away from God, but here's why you're running. Number one is a lack of knowledge of God. Hosea preaches and he writes that Israel, the reason you're running from God is because of your lack of knowledge for God. And the word used for knowledge in the Hebrew language is a word called yada. Not Yoda. Don't get excited, Star Wars fan. I got excited too. It's yada. And what yada means is not some intellectual knowledge. It's a relational knowledge. And so what Hosea is saying is, you know all about God intellectually. You know about the temple. You know about the work he's done. You can ace a test on what God has done in the history of Israel. You know that intellectually, but you don't know him relationally. You don't have this intimate relationship with God. They knew about God, but they didn't really know God. And there is a big difference in that. Because you can talk about God all day, but if you don't have the intimate relationship with him, you don't really know him. And when you don't know him, it leads us to go astray. And this is what happened with Israel. It led them to immoral actions. Hosea 4, 1 and 2 says this, hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who lived in the land. There is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. There's only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing, and adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. This is how Israel was living. They would cheat, they would kill, they would murder, they would destroy, they wouldn't love their neighbor as themselves or anything like that. And they lived like that in all of their lives. And then what they would do is they'd go to the temple and worship the God of Israel. It's like, yeah, I know we're living this way, but you know what? We're told to follow these religious rules, do the sacrifices. They knew intellectually what to do, but they had no intimate relationship with God. No real relationship. It was all intellect, but it was empty religious practice. They had no knowledge of God. They also had the accusation of idol worship. They pursued and worshiped fake gods from different cultures around them. They went to temples to worship and make offerings to these other gods for their own purposes. And what they were doing is they were doing what every single person in life does. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for blessings. And they believed they could find it through these other false gods. That's why they brought the raisin cakes. And whatever they could do to get these blessings and find this purpose and find these meanings. But God was reminding them, you're not going to find those things away from me. So you're chasing after these false gods, these idols. So they have idol worship. And then they had this accusation. They had the accusation of their political alliances. And yeah, we just got political in this sermon. Sorry about that, but we're going to go there. Israel had an alliance with Assyria and Egypt at this point, and both Assyria and Egypt were extremely powerful in that culture in that day. They could wipe Israel off the map with one snap of their finger. It's over, it's done for them. And so Israel sees Egypt and sees Syria as like their only hope to keep their kingdom, their only hope to keep their freedoms. They were trusting in them, and so they paid them in money, paid them in resources. They essentially worshipped Egypt and Assyria because that was their hope of keeping the lives that they had. They had these political alliances, and they believed that their hope was there, but Hosea said to them that this is wrong, that their only hope and only true alliance is to be God. You see, the Israelites thought that it was a good thing to have these alliances, but it's actually a really bad thing. It was nationalism. They put this above the relationship with God, and when something takes the place of God, it is sin, and in this case, it's the sin of idolatry. Hosea even warned them if they don't change that Assyria was going to come and take them over. If you don't change your hearts, turn back to God, stop with these alliances, Assyria is going to turn on you, and they're going to take you over. These are the accusations against Israel. This is what made Israel unfaithful, and God was still relentlessly pursuing them. And Hosea was the one used to get their attention. I want you to hold on to all this stuff I just said. A lot of history, a lot of storytelling right now. I get that. Hold on to it because here's the reason for that. Hosea's life and ministry happened almost 3,000 years ago. And yet his life and his prophecy still easily fits into our culture right now. Think about that for a moment. The things he said 3,000 years ago, you can almost copy and paste it to our culture and our lives and our struggles here today. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, this is what we see in our lives. And this is where God's word is alive and active because Hosea's words still ring true today. And here's the first point of it. God is still relentlessly pursuing us. God is choosing and wanting to be in a relationship with you. The story of the Bible is about God's creation, and after that, his pursuit of keeping his creation, especially mankind, in a relationship with him. It's always been about this intimate relationship with us. From creation to Israel to the prophets to Jesus, and now it's about people finding their way back to God. This is what God longs for. This is what he's working for. He is relentlessly pursuing that. And Hosea reminded Israel of that. And here we are, hopefully 3,000 years later, are being reminded of that today. God is relentlessly pursuing us. But we also have this truth that we run constantly. Just like Israel and just like Gomer, we cheat. We run away from our first love. We run away from God. And we pursue other things for so many other reasons. And the reason we do that is the exact same reasons Israel did it 3,000 years ago. One is we have no knowledge of God. We don't have a knowledge of God. And this is what happens sometimes because I grew up in this culture. I'm sure a lot of you have too. We grew up in church or did the church thing for a while. Then we went away from it. And we had this intellectual knowledge of God, sure. We can give Bible school answers. We can give all those different things. We know what you're supposed to do when you go to church, no matter what your background is. We have the intellectual knowledge about God, but we don't have a real intimate relationship with God. There's a big difference. That's the difference between religion and true relationship. And maybe you felt that tension. Maybe this is one of the reasons you're trying to figure out God now by connecting with one church is what's this deal with God? What's the real relationship here? And this is one of the ways we run. We learn about God or act like we do. We even go through some of the religious practices, but a real relationship with God isn't there. And how do we know that? Look at the fruit in our lives. If we want to know if we're trusting and following God is transforming us, look at the fruit, what we're producing out of our lives. Are we growing in love, or is there more hate that's growing? Are we growing in joy, peace, and patience? Or are we growing in frustrations and impatience, and we want conflict more and more? Are we being kinder? Are we doing good? Are we being faithful to God? Are we being gentle? Do we have self-control? Or do we not see those things? If we want to see if God is really working, if we're trusting and following, those fruits should be coming out of our lives. We should be growing in that. And we run from God when we don't know God. And the evidence of that is the fruit. So we have no knowledge of God. And just like Israel we also choose idols over God. Now, this is where things are a little different from that culture today. Like, we don't have these random temples over here in our culture, here in CV and Pittsburgh and things like that, where you go, you can offer raisin cakes or whatever it may be, so you can, have better luck with fertility or jobs or whatever that may be, or relationships. We don't have those temples, but here's the deal. We don't go to those temples to worship false gods, but we still have false idols. We take things in our lives and we elevate them to the status of God. Tim Keller, who's a pastor and author, he writes and defines idols in his book, Counterfeit Gods, like this. He says this: it is anything more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God. Anything you seek to give you what only God can give. An idol is whatever you look at and say in your heart of hearts, if I have that, then I'll feel my life has meaning. Then I know I'll have value. Then I'll feel significant and secure. There are many ways to describe that kind of relationship to something, but perhaps the best one is worship. Tim Keller defines idols and idol worship as anything we elevate higher than God. And here's the truth. We're all guilty of that. We all do that. Anything we take in our lives and put in the place that God should be, we make it into an idol. And this can be anything, even stuff that is good at its core. We can take it and make it bad because we elevate it where it shouldn't be. In Israel, it was literally worshiping false gods and temples. For us, we have idols of work, that we worship work. We put in crazy hours. We find our value in our purpose and our meaning in work. We find our purpose in the check that we get from our work and the bank account that we grow and spend money on. It's all about work, and we'll give so much time there that we replace God with work. We do with family. We do it with our spouse and our children, or whatever it may be. And these are good things. I'm not saying these are bad things, but when we take these things, we elevate them above where God should be, we turn them into an idol. We turn them into this false god that we worship and give our lives to, and those things will let us down. We worship the idol of escape. We work Monday through Friday in order we can escape on the weekends, or we escape through addiction, or we escape through something in our lives that makes us feel like we can get away from it, kind of numb it a little bit. We can just get away from all the stress that we're dealing with throughout the week, so we worship escape. In Wisconsin, we called this idol going up north. And what that meant was there's this thing in Wisconsin, it's kind of like Pittsburgh, where you had like 3 nice summer months of the year. Everything else was cold and dark and dreary, kind of like how it was in Pittsburgh. And so what people did in Wisconsin, they would just go up north. They would work Monday through Friday, and they were gone. You wouldn't see them on the weekends because they were getting up north to escape all the tensions of life Monday through Friday. And there's nothing wrong with going up north. There's nothing wrong with us going away on the weekends or getting a little trips away. Those are good things. But when it becomes what we live for, we turn it into an idol. And that causes us to run from God. We turn other hobbies into idols. We turn relationships into idols. We turn politics into idols. Just like Israel, our alliances and allegiances to politics can turn them into idols, and it causes us to walk away from God. And that's not a statement about one side, other side, middle, anything. Anything that we elevate above God is an idol. And we all do that. We worship things that shouldn't be worshiped. And these things aren't originally bad things, but we turn them into bad. And anything we place above where God is a sin. And we may not like to hear that, but this is true. And these are ways we run away from God. And this is a story of Hosea. But the thing with Hosea's story, though, is even though it's dark, it's weird, it's dreary at certain points, because he's just like, listen, Israel, this is how you cheat and run away from God. There is hope. And the hope is found in not us, but what God is doing and how he pursues us relentlessly, even when we run. The weird story of Hosea marrying an adulterous woman is one that shows that we have hope that what God is doing. Despite our running, he's never done pursuing us. And the truth of the matter is this. The reason God's doing that is because a relationship with God is better than anything else. It's better. Hosea 11:8 says this, how can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I treat you like Admon? How can I make you like Zeboim? And these are just different areas of culture in that world that he's writing to. My heart is changed within me, and my compassion is aroused. What we deserve is God's wrath. Instead, we're giving God's grace. Hosea's message ends in hope for what God is going to do, and it's the promise of Jesus. God loves us so much that in his pursuit, he's going to send his son, God in the flesh, Jesus, to come and pay for our ransom. Just like Hosea had to pay for Gomer to come back to him because of the debt she incurred, the ransom that was needed, God is going to send Jesus to come pay our debt for us. And our debt is because of our sin. This is what God is doing. He says, I'm not going to give up on you. I'm going to go after you. I'm going to do so by sending myself through my son to come and pay your debt, to come and pay your ransom. You see, our sin leaves us captive and in debt, and we can't pay it, but Jesus did. If you want to know what God thinks of you, simply just look at Jesus, because so often we can think God is distant, he doesn't care, or he's angry, or whatever it may be, and sometimes the Bible, the weirdness of it can make us think that, but if you want to know what God truly thinks of you, look at Jesus. Because despite our running, God ran harder and further. Despite our unfaithfulness, God was faithful. Despite our rebellion, God was relentless in his pursuit, ultimately through Jesus. So the question I want to ask us today as we are wrapping up this Hosea story is this. Where are you in your relationship with God right now? Are you with him? Or are you running from him? There's really only two answers there. What are the idols that you've elevated above where God should be in your life? What are those things that we chase after, that we've worshiped through our life, through our resources, through our time and energy? What are those things? Because here's the truth. God's pursuing you. He's chasing after you. He wants a relationship with you so much that he's pursuing you right now. See, oftentimes we can get twisted and think we're exploring God, which we are in a lot of cases. We ask questions. We gather together as a church. We do small groups, and things like that. We explore God, and that's good. But we're not the one originally pursuing him. He's pursuing us. And I think the reason we start pursuing him back is because we know, we feel, we've experienced his pursuit of us. And here's the one thing, because of that, I want us to walk with. If you're new, here's what the one thing is. If you forget everything else I say today, which is probable, not even possible, probable, remember this. It's not whether or not God is pursuing you. It's whether or not you're going back to him. God is pursuing you. I don't know where you are in your background with God, with Jesus, with faith, with church, any of that stuff. I don't know all those details about you, but I do know this. God loves you so much, he's pursuing you. And here's the thing. Maybe some of you in this room, you're a Christian right now. You follow Jesus, you've pursued Jesus, you've given your life to Jesus, but here's what I know, and I know it because of my experience and other Christians' experience that I've talked to in my life. We still run. We still chase after idols. We still go to intellectual knowledge over relational knowledge. We still align ourselves with things that aren't of God. And maybe you're here, you're someone you've never really turned back to God. You've explored him, and maybe you feel it. Maybe today is a moment and a chance and an opportunity to say, you know what? God is pursuing me, and so I'm going to turn back to him. Maybe you need to realize that the things that you do pursue in life don't compare to who God is, because this is where we actually find life. The things we chase in life, the idols that we turn into, these false gods, they are things that are good in and of themselves, because we're looking for meaning and purpose and hope in those things, but they're ultimately going to let us down. The only one who doesn't is God. So the question is, it's not whether or not God is pursuing you, it's whether or not you're going back to him. And the question becomes, what are you going to do about this? This is the last verse in the book of Hosea, 14:9. He says this, who is wise, let them realize these things. Who is discerning, let them understand. The ways of the Lord are right. The righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble in them. Hosea's message was 3,000 years ago, but it's still true today. God is all about healing and saving and relentlessly pursuing his people to show us how much he loves us. But here's where the difference can be. Israel in the time of Hosea, when he gave this message, he gave this prophecy, Israel didn't listen. See, a lot of times we want to think of the Bible and think of stories, they all have these happy endings. Hosea is not a happy ending, actually. Sure, it ends with hope that Jesus is coming, but Israel was like, nah, I like my raisin cakes and my idols way too much. And they kept chasing after these idols, kept chasing after the political alliances, kept running away from God. And shortly after this, Assyria came and destroyed Israel. Their kingdom was gone again. They felt lost. They were in captivity. But God still wasn't done. Even though they didn't listen to him, even though their own sin got them into a lot of trouble with Syria and all these different things, God wasn't done. He was still working to pursue them, ultimately through Jesus. And maybe Hosea didn't get to see the outcome of God's work with Jesus, but now we know the outcome of God's work. That when Hosea was telling Israel that God is not going to give up on you, he's going to call you to a lifetime of faithfulness despite your cheating and your adultery, your unfaithfulness. He's not done loving you yet, so much so he's giving himself through Christ. And that same message fits for you and me. Despite our cheating, despite our running, despite us turning other things into idols, God's not done chasing after us. And so he sent Jesus to live, to teach, but ultimately to die and resurrect, to pay the ransom that we have for our sin, so we can go back to God, so we can have life with him. And we worship that each week through communion. The reason we gather as a church ultimately is because of Jesus, because that ultimately shows us what God thinks of us. He loves us so much that he gave his son for us. And so we're going to pass communion. If you're new here, here's what we do. Hang on to the communion. They're little prepackaged things. After this next worship song, we take communion together as one church because we believe together is better, and this is how we're wired to be in community. So I'm going to pray. We're going to pass communion, but let's remember, God's pursuing you. Are you turning back to him? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this morning and this chance again to gather as one church. And we thank you for the school to meeting, God. We thank you for the people in this room, the people running One Kids, God, just the church you're building here. God, we thank you for the story of Hosea, and as weird as it is, God, it's so crazy. Remind us that in the weirdness you work. In the things that seem unbelievable, you are believable because of how faithful you are, God. And even when things seem that they are too crazy, remind us of Jesus. That's where our hope lies. That's where we know what you think of us. That's how we know you love us so much, is because of Jesus. We thank you for him. We thank you for Hosea, and it's your name we pray.